Get the recording going there. There we go. My name is Amanda Finley. I started COVID-19 Long Haulers Discussion Group, the support group on Facebook. And hello, internet friend. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Arijit Chakravarty.
Thank you so much for being here. And today we are going to talk about the pharmaceutical research and development process, not so much about long COVID research in specific. So let's get started. I'm going to start with what does the pipeline from hypothesis or discovery to FDA approval look like?
Yeah, great. So before that, maybe I'll tell you just a little bit about myself, so
Yeah, that'd be great.
so people can understand why I'm sitting here and holding forth on this topic. So I've been in pharma research for 2 decades. I'm a PhD in biochemistry who chose the dark side a long time ago, and I've been in industry pretty much my whole career. I started out as a computational biologist for a while. I did genetic analysis and microarray analysis, that kind of thing, for a little bit, despite having been trained as a cell biologist of all things. But then very quickly, when I joined industry, I pivoted to becoming a much more mainstream traditional pharmacologist. I was a pharmacology group leader at Millennium Pharmaceuticals, which became Takeda, for about 15 years. Started out as pharmacology group leader, went on from there to being a discovery project lead. So, which meant I was responsible for about 7 programs in Takeda's pipeline, the entirety of the preclinical support for those programs. I went on from there to building and running a modeling and simulation group, whose remit it was to use mathematical modeling to make drug discovery more efficient within Takeda. I spun that group out, and that's the company that I run now, Fractal Therapeutics. We basically help companies move their drugs more quickly through the preclinical process and into the clinic and to clinical proof of concept. So that's the day job. Some of you may know me from our writings on COVID. We've published about 15 peer-reviewed papers and another 10 manuscripts on COVID. And we've been very vocal about COVID from a public health perspective, not always from a drug discovery and development perspective, but I think so. This is the intersection of what we'll be talking about today. We'll be talking primarily about drug discovery and development and the ways in which drug discovery and development operates. But then also we can talk about in context a little bit about COVID, as much as you want to discuss, Amanda.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, let's hit on that, because a lot of people don't understand. We think, oh, there's this eureka moment, and a few years later, poof, there's a magical drug, and we're all saved. And that's just not how it works. So can you describe that for me, please?
Usually it starts, so usually a cure is found in the first 20 minutes of the movie. And then there's challenges. And by about, the third act, it's all done. And it's just about getting it to people. So it usually fits in an hour and a half, really, right? So, a lot of people talk about how long it takes and how expensive drug discovery and development is. And there's 2 big reasons for that. And one is that there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And the other one is because there's a lot of money wasted on bad decisions, quite honestly. And bad decisions happen in every sphere of life. If you are in an IT company, you look around you and say, I can't believe these guys are doing this. It's the same in drug discovery and development. No matter what field you're in, if you're a school teacher, you look at your colleagues and say, are they really going to do that? And yes, they are. So that's how life is, right? None of us alone is as stupid as all of us together. Large companies have their own dysfunctions. So there's a lot of drug discovery and development which boils down to wrong turns. Some of those wrong turns are avoidable. Some of those wrong turns are not avoidable. So maybe we can talk about sort of what is the process? How does it all work? How do the pieces fit together? So we'll start at the beginning. So a drug is a chemical that modifies some biology in patients in a good way to do good things for them without killing them first. If a drug kills the patient before it actually modifies the disease condition, we call that thing a toxin. And several hundred years ago, in medieval times, there was a philosopher who said basically that the dose makes the drug. So we kind of live that life. So in other words, the core discipline that I'm from is called pharmacology. And in pharmacology, we study what drugs do to the body and what the body does to drugs. And really understanding the dose to response relationship in pharmacology is a large chunk of what has to happen at every step along the way. So let's suppose somebody comes up with a bright idea. An academic publishes a paper and says, hey, I found an enzyme inhibitor, and this enzyme inhibitor, interferes with this process in diabetes. And it basically will, I think, and here's the paper, I think this inhibitor is going to severely restrict or reduce the amount of diabetic neuropathy that's formed, right? So what happens is you get like basically pain in your nerves, and so this, say hypothetically, a researcher finds a compound that inhibits the neurons responsible for that pain signaling, right? So splashy Nature paper, of course, everybody talks about it in the news. It shows up, so-and-so scientists have found a cure for diabetic neuropathy. Happens every so often, right? Is it a drug? Is it a cure? The answer is no. And the reason is because what that thing is it's an enzyme inhibitor. You can make it, you can market it, you can sell it to labs, and they can pour it on their cells in test tubes and inhibit the enzyme. That's perfectly legit. But when you're giving it to a patient, it comes back to that whole question, right? Of the dose makes the poison. So will you kill the patient first, or will you actually treat the diabetic neuropathy? And shockingly, or maybe not so shockingly, most of the time, the answer to that question on day one is, I just don't know. So a lot of work goes into first figuring out, how do I judge whether or not the efficacy that I see preclinically will be seen in the clinic? So the efficacy I see in test tubes in animals has to, what we call, translate over to the clinic. And then we have to start asking very practical questions like, how often should we dose this thing? Who should we give it to? How do we dose escalate in the clinical trial? And then that sort of builds up towards designing the clinical trial process. The clinical trial process itself, as many of you know, is a long drawn out process, because first you test that the drug is safe. That's the phase 1 trial. Then you test that the drug impacts the disease. That's the phase 2 trial. And then in phase 3, you check that the drug impacts the disease better than the competition does. So you have basically 3 big steps to go through. Phase 1 trials are often, anywhere between 10 and say 60 patients. Phase 2 trials can be a couple of hundred patients in many indications. And in many indications, the phase 3 trials are thousands of patients. So the whole thing takes years and years to do on the clinical side. What people don't often appreciate is it also takes years and years on the preclinical side. So very often programs will take 4 to 5 years to get to the clinic, because there's a lot of degrees of freedom on day one. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to reduce the degrees of freedom. When they're synthesizing a compound, when you start out with an inhibitor, say that academic lab's inhibitor, usually they won't take that inhibitor into the clinic. What they'll do is they'll use that inhibitor as a tool compound to study the way it binds to the protein that they're interested in, and keep jiggering with it until they can find something that has the properties they want in terms of staying in the body long enough, in terms of not being toxic. So first off, they'll do a bunch of chemistry, and they'll keep dinking with the molecule, changing groups on the molecule to make sure that they can actually use it in the body, or to make it more friendly to the body, so to speak. Then they'll test it in animals to say, hey, did we achieve what we hoped for? And they'll do things like they'll project the pharmacokinetics of the drug. How long does the drug last in the body? The pharmacodynamics of the drug, meaning what is it doing to the enzyme? And they'll check toxicity. And then when they're comfortable with that, then you start working in animal efficacy models. You do the animal efficacy work, then you start making projections or best guesses in terms of what will happen in the clinic. So that whole process can take years, and most programs fail. So essentially what you're doing is, when you start from an enzyme inhibitor, you first reconfigure the inhibitor, reconfigure the chemical compound to make it more friendly, to make it more drug-like, as they say. Then you do the workup bit by bit to say, will this thing actually do what it's supposed to? And as you're doing that, you're scaling up how much compound you're manufacturing. As you're doing the workup, you're also making decisions. Once you've decided on which compound you're going to take forward, you're making decisions about how you're going to run that clinical trial. That whole process takes about, just deciding what goes into the clinical trial alone is a bunch of experiments that takes about a year to do if you're fast. Then you go into the clinical process, and that's another 3-step process. So from end to end, it can be as much as 15 years and as little as 5 years. But it's usually a very long process. And most of it has to do with the fact that on day one, a drug discovery or development program is a leap of faith. You started with something that was an enzyme inhibitor, and now you're saying, I'm going to feed this thing to people, and I'm going to inhibit that enzyme in people. And it's a huge leap to go from, here I found a compound, to here, this is a drug.
Yeah, thank you. And I this is exactly why I wanted to bring you in. So How do we make these initial discoveries or form a hypothesis?
Yeah, so the initial discoveries are usually made by academic labs. So there's a ton of publications on, any given disease. Usually for any given disease, there's an academic ecosystem that's doing the basic science. So I myself have, during my years as a pharmacologist, I've put together presentations that led to a drug discovery program getting started. And the way I did it was I would go dive into the literature for a given topic, deep dive on it, and start asking questions like, "Hey, what would happen if we inhibit this protein in people? Will it kill cancer? Will it kill people?" So what you do is you keep sifting through and looking for things. For example, if you're looking for a cancer drug, which is my sort of home territory, so to speak. If you're looking for a cancer drug, you would be saying first, do I have a reasonable expectation that inhibiting this will inhibit tumor cell growth? And then also, do I have a reasonable expectation that inhibiting this will not inhibit the basic processes that the patient needs to live with? So you start out from there, you basically formulate a hypothesis, and you kind of justify it piece by piece. You say, okay, here's the protein, here's what they saw in cells. This protein, when you inhibit it in cells, these are the steps that cells undertake to die. We think that this would happen in a wide range of tumor types. We think that here's why we think that patients should be able to tolerate this at some dose that is sufficient. So you kind of lay out the paper case, so to speak, justifying why you think that this thing will kill cancer cells, but not patients. The same is true for any other disease.
Let's see. And we've already kind of gone over that, so I'm going to skip that. Let's come up here. How can we best advocate for ourselves in a corporate setting? We do this a lot with government settings, but I don't think we think about this aspect very often.
So that's a really interesting question. So it kind of depends on whether or not the pharma company in question has an interest in that disease. So this is where it gets a little bass-ackwards, because there are strong interests. So say you're a multiple myeloma patient, you'll find places where you can advocate for yourself, because there's lots of companies working on multiple myeloma, and you can plug in to the patient advocacy groups. If you're a rare disease patient, you can go find the rare disease groups, and you can, through the rare disease groups, you can try and put pressure on companies to work on that disease. So there are sort of structured ways in which you can tap into some of those things. Some diseases, on the other hand, it's really difficult to get people's ear to work on, right? So one example is endometriosis, right? There's a huge number of endo patients, worldwide, and there's very little funding, academic funding for endo, and there's very little commercial interest in endo. I have no idea why. It's really kind of like baffling if you think about it.
Right.
But it just is. So how do you break through that? I have no idea. I think what it comes down to is that a lot of this, in a lot of this, the corporate priorities follow government research priorities. So suppose I want to start out a program in endometriosis, right? What I'm going to run into is I'm going to run into a wall of, there's not a lot of good research on endometriosis to begin with, so we don't understand it very well from a basic science standpoint. Pharma companies are notoriously reluctant to go fund, a 10-year basic science program. So you're not building on much. So if I as a scientist in pharma was like, hey, we should go work on this target for endo, the barrier I would face is that I wouldn't be able to necessarily make a case, a rock solid case that yes, if we did this, we would be able to, change endometriosis patients' outcomes, because it's insufficiently studied. So the lack of funding at the NIH level translates to a lack of interest at the corporate level. The same is true for COVID, right? COVID is a great example, right? So during the first year of the pandemic, if I recall correctly, 2020 to 2021, roughly 3 times as much money went on government grants funding the Alzheimer's beta amyloid plaque hypothesis, which is a narrow sliver of Alzheimer's research that went for COVID research that was aimed at therapeutics. So not counting warp speed. Warp speed was its own beast, and we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
But aside from warp speed, they spent pennies on COVID research. Why? Yeah. Because there was an expectation that COVID would be over, so nobody wanted to work on it. Nobody wanted to fund it. And what ends up happening is, for example, when you have large academic labs that are well established studying Alzheimer's, you got to fund them. So grants have to be put out because there's 10,000 people working on Alzheimer's. So it kind of is circular, where wherever the research community has settled is where the funding is going. Wherever the funding is going is what will get solved. So it's a kind of a bit of a getting the flywheel moving problem. But I do think if you are impacted by a disease and you are looking for ways in which to get to treatments and cures, the most fundamental thing that we can do, therefore, is to push the government, push government funding agencies to increase the amount of funding for those diseases. Because in the absence of that, nothing moves.
Yeah, that's and finding ways to be heard, but that's another town hall. Do that one, y'all.
And well outside my sphere of expertise.
I get that. Hold my corn. So here's a very specific question. When a medication says to take with food, why is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So when you have a medication that says take with food, the field of actual science that determines that is called clinical pharmacology. So what they would almost certainly have done is they would have measured the blood levels in patients of that drug. They measured the blood levels, and they would have said, more than likely, that the amount of drug in blood is impacted on an empty stomach. There could be a couple of different reasons for it. It could be the case that on an empty stomach, the acid is attacking the drug and breaking it down, so drug doesn't get in. It could be that the capsule makes its way out quickly when there's no food in there. Either way, you're having problems with what's called bioavailability. So your medicine is going straight through and not going into the blood. So they'll have done studies looking at what happens to blood levels without without food, and then with food. And then when they compare those two, then they can ask the question, is there a food effect or not? And how do we then recommend? So food effect studies are a whole separate, like subset of clinical trials that just look at that question narrowly. And so there's quite a bit of science, interestingly enough, behind a little thing on the label. And when you're a scientist working in pharma, when your science led to the label being changed, it's kind of cool, because you're actually seeing, in a concrete, tangible way, hey, this is what is happening differently as a result of what we're doing.
Let's see. I'm going to hit on this. This is a fantastic question. It takes a long time to bring new drugs to the market, but in pandemic situations, it is urgent to find effective treatments, and repurposing old drugs is one way to do that. Why don't we see many pharmaceutical companies doing trials with repurposed drugs? Is it just because they won't be able to make much money off of old patent drugs that are as available as generics?
It's a great question. So I'll back up and say, in the summer of 2020, we were writing and putting together papers that said that vaccines alone were not going to solve the problem for COVID, that the virus was going to mutate quickly to avoid both the vaccinal and our immune system responses, antibody responses. And we also showed that simply relying on non-pharmaceutical interventions alone wouldn't work, because people would be, jerks about it. So we had these papers going out at the end of 2020. And what we had, what we said at the time was, hey, it'd be cool to put together a bunch of grant proposals that say, let's do nasal sprays that are combinations of repurposed drugs. Let's do inhalers that are combinations of repurposed drugs. We personally put out like 10 or 12 of these things, SBR, small business grants to the NIH. They rank these things on a scale of 1 to 10, in rank order, for how desirable it is for things like impact. And we were making 9 out of 10 for impact, which is terrible, which is like as bad as it gets. And we would get comments back saying, this is a hammer in search of a nail. This is a solution in search of a problem. And this was in January, February of 2021, by which time it was very obvious that the vaccines were not going to solve the problem. But when you look back at how much was funded for basic research, you can actually look these things up. And I did look it up. I think there were maybe 1 or 2 grants funded through that entire period for repurposing. Beyond like the ivermectin craze or hydroxychloroquine craze. So there was a little bit of a craze. There were a couple of molecules that everybody was talking about that got quite well funded, and then everything else there was no interest in. So why is that? And I think there's two reasons. One, the questioner answered their own question, which is there's a perception that you can't make money off a repurposed drug. Whether that's right or wrong. I happen to think it's wrong. Fun fact, I'm a patent agent. I did that on the side. So the reason why I say it's wrong is because there is a way to build an intellectual property franchise around your drug that doesn't necessarily include.
Oh, did I lose you or did you lose me? I think we lost him. Stay tuned. I will tell knock-knock jokes. Hold up.
When pharma companies are reluctant to engage, this means that academic funding, it's a chicken and egg problem. Academic funding groups don't want to fund those things. So it becomes a bigger and bigger leap of faith. Plus, as a side point, it really doesn't help that the people who are advocating for, those kinds of repurposed drugs were, the science was just not there. The guys doing the ivermectin stuff, that was just bad science. Hydroxychloroquine, that was bad science. There were good numbers of examples of academic fraud, of, straight up dishonesty. So that really didn't help. Ivermectin, ironically, could have helped. There was data that showed, not from us, but other people did mathematical modeling that showed you don't want to give ivermectin intravenously. What you do want to do is develop an alternative formulation so you can deliver it, for example, inhaled. So these guys, one of our competitors actually in mathematical modeling, put out a pretty nice paper saying, hey, you should use inhaled ivermectin. But it was too late, because by that time, people were popping horse pills down their throat. So and you had all of this really shady science going on. So it had already given ivermectin a bad name.
Yeah, and I exactly, and I won't even go there. That's another town hall, which we have already done.
Yeah, I think what ended up happening was it also got framed falsely and very unhelpfully
Yeah,
as being the people who thought vaccines were panacea and the people who thought ivermectin was a panacea. So there was all of this sort of magic bullet thinking going on, where you had
exactly.
groups of people who didn't want to do NPIs, who didn't want to take COVID seriously, but were more than happy to pop a horse pill or more than happy to vaccine relax. And so that kind of like, I'm just going to do this one thing and we're going to call it good thinking, both created the crisis we're in now, but also harmed research on both sides of that equation.
And I think I hope that's a cautionary tale for us as well going into long COVID. We will not have a panacea for long COVID treatment either, and we need to remember that. There will not be a hashtag cure.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And right, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these kinds of big problems need big solutions, right? People used to die in car accidents all the time. If the seatbelt guys were fighting the airbag guys, and the two of them were like teaming up to gang up on mothers against drunk driving, we wouldn't have had the outcomes with traffic deaths that we did. So what ended up happening was each sort of subgroup of people was advocating for their own like golden bullet to the solution to the problem. And essentially what happened was it got politicized, and in the end we did nothing.
Yeah.
We don't have good cures. The vaccines barely work. Nobody's vaccinating and nobody's doing anything. So hey,
Right.
here we are.
Right. Well, let's before we dive further into that, how can we do the same thing with supplements? And I police this very hard in the group because I want people to remember, and the rule number one is no medical advice. You are not a licensed practitioner, nor should a licensed practitioner do that online. That includes supplements. Let's talk
Look,
about that.
so here's the thing, right? So if we think of a supplement as a chemical that you're taking to change the course of disease in the body, there's a name for that thing. It's called a drug.
Yeah.
Right? So fine, if you're going to make a claim that, echinacea extract is giving you, for example, antiviral properties, that's dandy. Please, by all means, do that. Make the claim after you've done the clinical trials. So there's nothing wrong with sourcing potential drugs by the supplement group. But the evidentiary standards are the evidentiary standards. So you don't get a pass because your bottle of snake oil promotes wellness, right? You really don't. But either it kills the virus, or either it does what it's supposed to, or it doesn't. Uh, which doesn't mean that there isn't room for a drug that is making its way to the clinic to go the supplement route, make vague promises, while continuing to develop it as a drug. There's a drug that I know of that these guys are kind of putting together as a supplement, as a wellness supplement. They're making vague claims right now. They are also running the clinical trials, and their goal is to get it through the approval process in a traditional way. When they get through that, they can make their specific claims.
Yeah.
That's fine. In this particular case, it's a little less shady because they're also publishing papers around the claims that they're making. I won't name the drug because I have no interest in that, but I'm saying there are potential strategies where you can take a supplement forward in a science-driven way and get it to approval while at the same time kind of, getting the word out there. But these things are very tightly regulated. So you can't just you can't just say whatever you feel like, right? And so the problem is a lot of the folks who equally, what I find really funny is the people who are very, hey, I don't trust the science on vaccines, or hey, I don't trust the science on this drug, will be meanwhile peddling their own, gold dust extract on the side. So it's kind of funny that way.
Well, and we are often targets of that. Oh, here, this will, and that's another reason I keep it out of the group, because we are not in the financial position to be taken advantage of like that. That's not
Right.
cool.
That's really important. And I think if as an individual, you're looking at a situation where there's a supplement, the question that you will need to ask, unfortunately, is what's the science supporting this? And when you think about the science, you can think about a hierarchy of evidence. If somebody ran a clinical trial and they showed that the symptoms were reduced, that's the top tier of evidence. I don't think that clinical trials are the top tier of evidence when it comes to things like seatbelts or face masks. But when it comes to an actual drug that you're taking, yes, that is the top tier of evidence. On the way down from that, a good distance down is animal studies, and a good distance down from that is binding studies. Lots of things bind to lots of things. It doesn't mean squat. So just because you're seeing binding data, take it with a grain of salt. If you see animal data, the question you should ask is, did that animal model that they were studying it in, did that animal model predict winners and losers for other drugs in this disease? If the answer is, this is the first drug of its kind for the disease, then discount the animal data, because you really can't, you have no way of knowing whether that's going to translate or not. So I understand that this is a heavy lift for most lay people, but it's not that heavy. I know a lot of people who've taught themselves a lot of biology, so it can be done. And if you are totally not in a position to do it, take a position of sort of skeptical ignorance, if you will. And that's healthy for you, because you could lose a lot of money with a lot of false promises.
Very much so, and I've seen it so many times. It's shattering too. It's also, there's this false hope. You get excited about it, and then it happens over and over again. So let's dive into some of these really difficult questions. Why did we pursue a vaccine-only strategy?
Right. One person to ask. In the summer of 2020, we were putting together a paper showing that the virus was going to very quickly evade. The viral spike protein was going to very quickly evolve around antibodies. We sent it to Nature in the fall, in like August or September of 2020. And they were like, go send it to some more focused special interest journal. Thanks for your interest.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it was very, very obvious from the get-go. And you didn't even need to go that far. Like what we did was we looked at the 3D structure of the spike. We looked at where the antibodies were binding. We looked at what mutations were coming up. And we were sort of asking the question, are there mutations already in the wild? And this was in the summer of 2020. Are there mutations in the wild that are capable of reducing antibody binding to the spike while not reducing spike binding to ACE2? And there were mutations in the wild in the summer of 2020 that had already been characterized that were doing this. So, but you didn't need to go that far. If you knew that it was coronavirus, you knew these things would happen, because everybody knew before the pandemic even started that you can get the common cold over and over again with the same virus. So we already knew that vaccines were going to be a piece of it, but couldn't be the entirety, because vaccines alone just cannot prevent evolution. We actually have a paper on that topic. Vaccines alone don't prevent evolution.
I think I would like a link to that, sir. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Happy to do that. But so from that perspective, I think, and from the perspective of rapidly waning immunity, we did a study as well at that same time to show that, with rapidly waning immunity, and it posted on medRxiv in the fall, in November of 2020, got published 5 or 6 months later, as papers often do. So it was well understood. If we did it, we were not the only people doing this. They must have had groups doing the modeling in the UK, in the US, in other countries in the West. There was modeling. If our modeling existed, other people's modeling existed as well. So it was well understood that going all in on vaccines would not give you the results you wanted. But I think what it comes down to is it's more of a soft answer. The science didn't support it. But hey, everyone was looking for a golden bullet. So when they weren't talking about ivermectin and when they weren't talking about drinking bleach, they were talking about vaccines. Because to be honest with you, the alternative was depressing, right? We were locked up. We were locked up in our houses. We were desperate for a way out. And there was a way out, and the way out was to throw the kitchen sink at it. But that sounds like a lot of work. On the other hand, you can write a $30 billion check to someone and say, go give us a vaccine and we'll take one vaccine and never have to worry about this again. It sounds nice. It was aspirational. And so I think that's what caught on.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I also think on that note, actually, I also think that the framing was all wrong. The framing was the Manhattan Project. The framing was the war-ending weapon. People actually use these terms, the war-ending weapon, right? So the thing about it is you can drop a nuclear bomb on the Empire of Japan, and the Empire of Japan will pause, to give it some thought and say, gee, maybe it's not a good idea to continue the war. You can't drop a vaccine on a virus and expect it to have the same effect as a nuclear bomb, because the virus can simply mutate around the vaccine. So it was the wrong analogy.
Yeah.
And what the analogy we should have been using at that time was, hey, a brand new leading cause of death has come up, just like it did when automobiles first came on the road. How do we enact a multi-pronged strategy to drive death down, to drive disease down?
I think a lot of us who screamed about that, I think of the Oppenheimer quote, some said nothing at all, which was probably not. A lot of us were screaming. And a lot of us who did scream, hey, no, it's not, you still need to wear your mask. We were viewed as a Cassandra of types where, oh, no.
Yeah. Exactly. We actually had a paper in the spring of 2021. In May of 2021, we posted a preprint that said, if you relax restrictions now, you will see a variant-driven rebound. And we posted it on May 12th, and on May 14th, the CDC was saying, if you're vaccinated, the pandemic's over for you.
Wow.
So,
and then,
these were easy to
what a
predict.
horrific summer. I'm from Southwest Missouri. I grew up there.
Wow.
We lost so many people that Joplin, Missouri, little bitty Joplin, Missouri, conservative bastion, was the very first municipality in the state to achieve 50% fully vaccinated.
Oof. Yeah. It's really sad in a way, because people got vaccinated out of fear.
Yeah.
Then the vaccines didn't do what they were promising that the vaccines would do. And it's just rattled people's belief in so many different things for no reason.
Yeah.
So the vaccines even today offer us a way out of this. Paradoxically, if we were all vaccinating several times a year and taking other measures, the vaccines could still be incredibly useful. But by basically taking a snake oil salesman approach to the vaccines, unfortunately, public health undermined trust in the vaccines as well.
And do you think it's too late to fix the problem?
No, it's not. It's really not. So here's how I look at it. It's a much more difficult problem today. COVID's a much more difficult problem today than it was in the spring of 2020, right? It is way more contagious. It's way more immune evasive. It's evolving at a really fast pace. But you could still grind this thing to a halt. The first thing you'd want to do is you want to change your mindset around it, right? And again, as we just discussed, think about the automobile accidents, right? How did we actually solve the problem? If you look at the automobile death rate, I'm going to mess up the exact numbers, but I think we're about 10-fold lower than we were at peak. In the 20s or 30s, you had I think 30 deaths for every 100 million miles driven or something like that. And now, at some point we were around 3. It's ticking on its way back up. But the way we got a massive reduction in mortality was by throwing the kitchen sink at it. Seat belts, crash test dummies, re-engineering cars so that ashtrays didn't fly off at your head every time a car got an accident. That was the thing, right? Ralph Nader, Unsafe at Any Speed, was the book in the 60s. So they actually they used a belt and suspenders approach to drive deaths down. And so if we took that approach with COVID, you could rein the problem in. So if you think about it this way, right? Everybody knows about the R naught, right? And the RT. So the RT is basically is the rate at which a virus spreads in the population, given the existing level of immunity and all of that. The R naught is the intrinsic rate at which the virus spreads. So the R naught as a number is basically how many other people the virus infects. So what we are doing as a public health strategy is we are relying on the RT being kept at or below 1 by reinfection.
Yeah.
This is a problem. To put it mildly, this is a problem, because what you're doing is you're requiring people to get infected over and over again, right? So on many different levels, that is not a public health strategy. First of all, reinfection as a public health strategy is not a thing. If you don't commit to infection control, you shouldn't be in public health. There's no meaning to being in public health if you consider some infections to be good, by definition, right? Because every infection has a cost, right? And with COVID, we know that cost is actually quite high. Yes. Get it 5 times and it will break something in your body. Get it 10 times, it will definitely break something in your body. And even mild cases can leave you with long-term impacts. So we know this, and we know that a chunk of the population is facing that today. What people don't fully appreciate is that they will all be in that chunk of the population. This is not some kind of unique disability. This is coming for every single one of us. So repeated reinfections doesn't work. And this, I think, has not sunk in at a policy level. So when you use RT, when you use reinfection to keep RT below 1, you've completely, as they say in French, screwed the pooch when it comes to public health. Because what you're doing is you're essentially letting the virus evolve uncontrolled, and you're subjecting humans to repeated reinfection. On the other side of it, also, at any given time, a variant can come along with a much higher infection fatality rate. Right. So you're rolling the dice on that as well. Yeah. So that's the problem as it stands today. What would it take to do it differently? Well, what if you didn't use the RT, but you use the R naught? And you said, let's try to keep the R naught below 1, which means you don't get a bonus from hybrid immunity, which is another way of saying reinfections are good for you.
Right.
So throw the idea of hybrid immunity out the window. It's useless. It's only useful for the virus. It benefits only the virus and nobody else. So let's talk about how we could build up immunity in the population that is not earned the hard way, right? Point number 1. So the more people you can vaccinate, the more often they get vaccinated, the better off we are. So if you stopped lying about COVID, if you were honest about the consequences, way more people would get vaccinated. So get way more people vaccinated, get them vaccinated way more often. You're reducing the total pool of people, so you're driving the RT down. You won't be able to drive it below 1 by that alone, because guess what? 50% of the population is a genius, right? We have at least 50% geniuses, if not more. So leave them alone. They're not going to get vaccinated, right? Yeah. But the rest of us, sheep that we are, we would get vaccinated, right? So that now cuts the R naught down by half. Then you improve indoor air quality. Improving indoor air quality beyond 5 or 6 air changes now is something that is financially feasible at the level of a country like ours. It would probably be on the order of, tens of billions of dollars, $20 billion. The cost of, basically the cost of a couple of, B-21 Raider bombers. No, really, each one of them is like, God knows what, right? So each one of them is 750 million. So, a squadron of Raiders would basically cover you for indoor air quality. And we're planning to buy 220 of those, by the way. So that right there is a second way to drive your R naught down, right? Then the third way you drive the R naught down is by building and distributing prophylactics, antiviral prophylactics at scale, right? So if you came clean about the dangers of COVID, a lot more people will be spraying their noses with antivirals. Now, we know there's a number of antivirals on the market in other countries, like Innovid in Israel, like Betadine in Thailand. There's a lot of these things out there, carrageenan spray. There's a reasonable amount of clinical data in those countries. If the US had favored getting those things on the regulatory pathway and getting them through the regulatory process, and in particular, if it had favored antiviral combinations, then we could have had those kinds of prophylaxis in place now. But if you had that available widely, you had that available cheaply, again, you would drive the R naught down. And then the next thing you'd want to do in a situation like this is you'd want to reinstitute test and trace. So you understood who was getting it, how often they were getting it, and you could troubleshoot in a rational way. Right. So instead of sweeping the whole thing under the rug, you would actually follow the cases, use as a metric how many infections you're getting, and then try to drive the infections down. Even if you don't drive the infections down to zero, you don't actually need to drive infections to zero. You just need to take the approach that you're suppressing the disease. So what do I mean by that? When the R naught is less than 1, then you would have people bringing COVID in from outside the country. Some people would get infected, but the transmission chains would die out. So if you had a situation like that, basically everybody would not be getting COVID twice a year. Going from 5 million people getting COVID a year in the country to everybody gets it twice a year, by the way, which is 700 million infections, is a big difference. And the difference between 5 million people getting it once a year and 700 million people getting it is that it's a much bigger toll on public health. In addition, if we had a situation where we were able to advocate for those who didn't want to get COVID to opt out of COVID, then that would immediately change things for a chunk of people. So in other words, having mask-only hours in stores, right? Normalizing mask wearing, pushing back on this whole thing of sort of, hey, are you anxious? Making it easier for people to get boosters repeatedly, updating the boosters at some frequency. These are the kinds of things that can be done. So there's a lot of small tactical things that can be done that would add up to a whole lot less disease. And if you could get to the point where there's a whole lot less disease, you would do another big thing. You would slow the virus's rate of evolution down. Right now, in a certain sense, we are losing the war against COVID for one simple reason. We cannot react to it fast enough. So if we put out a new vaccine today, the virus can defeat the vaccine tomorrow because there's a quadrillion monkeys on typewriters waiting to defeat every new vaccine that's thrown at it. But if you slow transmission down, you would slow down evolution. And if you slow down evolution, you would make it easier to stop this thing in its tracks. So, all things considered, is it a bad situation? Yes. Is it possible to actually turn the ship around? Yes, it's a cruise ship. It won't turn around in a day, but it is possible. And what it really takes is the change of mindset to say, hey, let's talk about this. This should be a discussable issue. We shouldn't be encouraging mass infection repeatedly. And we should be talking about how to get to fewer infections, not more.
How do we do this in a context of we're not tracking anything?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think many things are broken. We've stopped tracking. There's a lot of concerted push to ascribe alternative explanations, alternative hypotheses for every long COVID or COVID associated post-acute COVID sequelae that we see. So all of these sequelae are actually going to add up, and the bill will come due to the economy, right? And so at the end of the day, you have, we've all seen these articles, right? That, this is a nightmare situation because you have a recession, but you have a full employment recession.
I've actually done articles on that myself. So,
right. And guess what? You're going to have a full employment recession for a long, long time if you drop 2% of the workforce out every year. If you unless you have some magical way to improve the birth rate, right? Which some people are working on.
No thanks, I opt out.
But there's a certain birth rate in the country. If COVID takes a 2% or 3% bite out of the growth of a population, then the working population will keep shrinking. The number of people who cannot work will keep increasing. You can't run an economy like that indefinitely.
Well, let's get into long COVID specifically here, and I want to be mindful of our time. I want to thank you so much for being here. What will have to happen? Well, here, let's do this. How much of a priority are long COVID treatments in pharma R&D?
So, as far as I can tell, and this is not outside as you because I'm not working in a big pharma company at present. We work outside that, outside the walls of the company. So, but I do have friends in all of the big pharmas, and from what I've heard, word on the street is that nobody is jumping through hoops to solve long COVID as a problem. So there's not you can see it in the reorgs, you can see it in the departments on LinkedIn, whatever. There's no push to thinking about long COVID as a therapeutic area. So I'd say pretty much, while there are companies here and there working on one or two symptomatic relief things, there's no concerted push. What's even funnier is that when primary research funding has gone in for long COVID, it's not gone for mechanistic work. It's gone for observational studies.
Yes.
And those observational studies have been aimed subtly at discrediting long COVID as being, anxiety or psychosomatic. So at a fundamental level, I think reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, still exists. And I think a lot of people in the research and development infrastructure for pharmaceuticals, both in academia and in industry, are kind of at that Wile E. Coyote moment, right? Where basically they've run off the cliff, and they're just going to, with sheer force of will, pretending that they haven't run off the cliff, levitate in space. It can only go on for so long.
What do you think? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically at present, I would say, we don't really have a plan, either in government-funded research or in corporate research. There doesn't seem to be a lot of movement.
Yeah, $1.15 billion, so we can go and look at it and not really do anything with it. That's been very frustrating to watch.
I mean, there is a mindfulness app, though.
Yes, there are actually several. I
Yeah,
think we're
well,
gonna, yeah. Let's see, what will have to happen to bring long COVID treatments to market?
Yeah, so there are two ways to look at this question. So one is sort of the apocalyptic view. The apocalyptic view is that things start breaking in a big way with what's happening, right? So in other words, as we talked about, like if you keep dropping people out of the workforce, at some point, you're going to end up with a situation where it's just not possible to continue like this. So that's a possibility. It's very much on the table. It's also very much on the table. The virus comes through with a variant that's much deadlier. So one way or the other, we could get to the point where COVID becomes more of a priority, a research priority, but not in a good way, right? It's possible. And the other possibility is maybe we should take a leaf out of the HIV advocates page.
I think, yeah.
So I think, if you looked at sort of what the Reagan administration did with HIV, first they othered the disease. It was, hey, it was the homosexuals, you don't need to worry. So they othered it, which is a very effective technique in a capitalistic society, because the minute you other something, then it's not your problem. And
oh, the power just went here. I'm sorry. Okay. That's great. That's just great. Oh goodness.
Your feed is still on.
It is. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. It looks like the Wi-Fi is still going. There's a storm coming through, so let's just keep going. Yeah. I actually have one of the people I brought into this. He brought himself into it, but into my circle is John James, who was very influential in HIV research. But go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, so first breaking loose of that sort of othering of long COVID as being this disease that unhealthy people get, disease that anxious people get, disease that women get. This is how they've been othering it. And like fighting that narrative is really important. And the second thing is, so making it clear that anyone can get long COVID, and that if you get COVID enough times, you will get long COVID is, I think, really important. And then the second thing is really pushing specifically for a better mechanistic understanding of what's going on. So there are 2 or 3 mechanistic hypotheses, which may not be mutually exclusive and may all be worth pursuing, right? One is that you have viral persistence in the body. So you have COVID virus just hanging out in different compartments. It's been fairly well demonstrated that that happens. The link between that and long COVID is not rock solid just yet. Viral persistence is pretty rock solid. Long COVID is pretty rock solid, but understanding the mechanistic link between those two has not been proven. The second thing is that long COVID is linked to immune dysregulation. Again, pretty clear that there's immune dysregulation, but again, that link is not well proven. So pushing for basic science around those things is really important right now. But I will say, at the end of the day, if long COVID is due to viral persistence or immune dysregulation, there are many diseases that we know of that have persistent virus in the body and have immune dysregulation. Those are really challenging diseases to build cures for. And so the first thing that people have to do is make sure that people get COVID less often. And that includes long COVID sufferers. So the fewer times we all get COVID, the better off we are. Even if you have long COVID, get COVID again, it's not going to be good.
Exactly.
So reducing the risk of infection is really critical right now. And then on top of that, pushing for basic research on long COVID mechanistically is really crucial. So one of the things in that space is, one of the things that we should all be pushing for is the right to opt out of reinfection.
Yeah.
And I think that if we could push for the right to opt out of reinfection, that's a start.
I could not agree with prevention. I talk about this in a socioeconomic sense of prevention is always far less expensive than reactionary measures.
Yeah.
So,
Which is not to say, like, long COVID research is hideously underfunded anyway.
oh my God, yeah.
So it's not an either or thing. Again,
No.
none of these are either or things. They spent $5 trillion on the pandemic. Of that $5 trillion, I think it was a total of 500 million at one point that
Yeah.
went for basic research.
And getting back to the overarching theme, it will not be one approach. It has to be everything on it.
Right. And I think this whole thing of, well, we have to prioritize, well, we can't do everything.
Yeah, you can.
Why not?
Why not? Humans are innately creative. We are intelligent beings. We can figure this out.
Yeah, I don't
We
see
should be
the
doing this.
I don't see the argument that we need to limit funding being used in other situations that are a priority.
Right. And I was talking about this with a virologist, also from Twitter. What we have now is bad. It's not the only virus out there. It's not the only virus that can mutate. And now that we've got an entire species of immunocompromised people, us, the next thing that comes along, wow. So I really appreciate your optimism in this and thinking, thank you, because I needed to hear that.
Well, I guess here's the thing. So at every step along the way, we've called the way in which things could go wrong.
Yeah.
And at every step along the way, each one of those things was avoidable.
Yeah.
So I'm not being optimistic in the sense of saying I'm sure that we'll work this out.
Yeah.
Because
oh no, I came into this with no optimism. Yeah. So thank you for that.
I think we're a bunch of lemmings, right? And it's always amazing how bad decision making is when it comes to the facts, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, it's all of the solutions are within technical reach.
Yeah.
Improve indoor air quality, encourage societal norms around masking, get people to vaccinate more often, fund prophylactics, fund therapeutics. All of these things can be done. And all of these things will lead to a better world than a world in which we do none of that and we simply focus on lying about COVID.
Yeah.
So if you think of the fork in the road, and this one way is hiding the data, lying about it, fighting the notion that it's happening, even though thousands and thousands of papers are piling up. The road to cognitive dissonance, nirvana. And the other way is to say, hey, we have a problem, let's work on fixing it. It's pretty clear that only one of those two routes will lead to an outcome that we're happy with 5 years from now.
I agree. Well, Arijit, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, look, many of us have felt hopeless. Many of us have felt frustrated. And it's been kind of like, it just keeps getting worse. What I will say is, I say this out to people. When people ask me, how much longer are you going to continue, being careful about COVID, or how much longer are you going to continue to take this seriously? I always ask them in return, how many more times are you planning on getting COVID?
Right. Yeah.
Right, because you're going to get it once or twice a year if you continue doing what you're doing. Sooner or later, we're on a path that's unsustainable. Sooner or later, society will have to change course. It's more or less a guarantee. It's going to happen either by a series of small paper cuts of reinfections, or it's going to happen with one big blow. But either way, we're going to change course. So it comes back to that old joke about the hunter and the bears, right? So the hunters and the bear. Two hunters met a bear on a forest path, and the first one started lacing up his shoes. So the second guy goes, "Why are you lacing up your shoes? You can't outrun a bear." And the guy looks at the second hunter and says, "You don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you." And so what I mean by that is, at the end of the day, we can still get out of this if we're determined to get COVID less often than other people are, because the cumulative societal price for repeated COVID reinfection is not one that society will be able to bear. So anything you can do to be cautious, even though it looks hopeless today, is still in your interest in the medium term, because in the medium term, my sort of sense is that this cannot continue.
No, I'm not much of I don't do princess Disney stuff, but I studied Southeast Asian cultures and archaeology when I was in college. And it was 2020, 2021. Disney produced a movie. It came out online. They started making it after the pandemic, or I guess before the pandemic. I'm sorry, before. But it had Southeast Asian themes in it, and I thought, oh, I have to watch this. I didn't know it was a movie about a global pandemic and mass grief. It was
wow.
sobering. Yeah, it's called Raya and the Last Dragon.
Oh, wow.
And there are so many. Wow, it really is a metaphor. I hope it doesn't get that bad. It comes down to the last few people in this civilization, and as much as they hate each other, and as much as they don't trust each other, they have to work together if they're going to solve it. So, and I'm not going to tell you what happens. Y'all go watch it.
That's good. Yeah, at the end of the day, the most important thing is just hang in there, right?
Yeah.
Retain a sense of realism, but don't confuse that sense of realism with sort of a sense of hopelessness. It's not. Yeah. It's a bad situation, and the first step in making a better situation for yourself is asking yourself, what can I do practically to keep holding out, to make it better for myself? And it's true both for us as individuals, but also for us as a society. I think delusion is not a path for that leads to good outcomes.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here, Arijit. I appreciate it so much. I'm so glad we connected. And come back and join us anytime. We love having people like you. So, you take care. Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pause this, and I will catch you on the flip over there on Twitter. Thanks again.
Good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.